Brothers and sisters, hello and welcome to Readings with Regina. I got a lot to cover today and I'm going to get started right away. Now, our first book is a very important text, and I'm speaking also to the new people who have subscribed to my channel. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This book is called The Slave Ship, and it's a human history, and it's by Marcus Rediker. This is called The Slave Ship, and the information inside of this book was taken from enslavers who were captains of slave ships that brought the captured African, over to the Americas. So you need to know this history. Here we go. Merchant Henry Lorenz. In April 1769, Henry Lorenz, one of early America's wealthiest merchants, I'm going to say that again, one of early America's wealthiest merchants, wrote to Captain Henson Todd, who was seeking a cargo in Jamaica to carry to Charleston, South Carolina. Lawrence was an experienced slave trader, and he was worried that Todd was not. He therefore cautioned that if the Jamaica merchant, quote, should ship Negroes on board your sloop, be very careful to guard against insurrection. Never put your life in their power a moment, for a moment is sufficient to deprive you of it and make way for the destruction of all your men, and yet you may treat such Negroes with great humanity. End of quote. It was an odd but revealing statement. Lorenz instructed the captain to treat with, quote, great humanity, end of quote, the very people who would, given a split second chance, annihilate him and his entire crew. Oh, such were the contradictions Lorenz faced, and not he alone. He knew the brutal realities of the slave trade and the resistances always engendered, and yet he tried to put a human face on the situation. Perhaps he feared that he had scared the captain, who might then overreact and damage his dangerous but valuable property. Dangerous but valuable property. Lorenz had by this time already built a fortune through booming Atlantic commerce. Do you look, Black people, understand that your enslavement was a business. I'll be talking more about that later, but I want to put that in your mind. Enslaving, dehumanizing the African was a business from the 16th century onward. This that I'm reading to you right now is the 1700s. All right, here we go. Lorenz had by this time already built a fortune through booming Atlantic commerce, the slave trade in particular. In 1749, at the youthful age of 25, he had formed a mercantile partnership, Austin and Lorenz, which expanded to include a new partner, George Appleby. 10 years later, business expansion. More than half of the slaves imported into the American colonies, the United States, came through Charleston, which served as a distribution point for the entire lower South. His firm played a leading part, and Lorenz himself grew knowledgeable about the various African ethnicities who arrived aboard the slave ships. He expressed a strong preference for Gambian and Gold Coast peoples as plantation workers and a decided distaste for Igbo and Angolans. Like Humphrey Maurice, A generation earlier, Lorenz organized the importation of about 60 cargoes of slaves. Unlike Maurice, who was usually a sole owner and investor in his voyages, Lorenz spread the risk by pooling money through partnerships. He wrote, quote, "The Africa trade is more liable to such accidents than any other we know of. So it concerns such as become adventurers in that branch to fortify themselves against every disappointment that the trade is incident to," end of quote. The trade was hazardous, as he cautioned Captain Todd, but it was also lucrative, gainful, or as he once put it, the most profitable. By 1760, Lorenz was one of the richest merchants, not only in South Carolina, but throughout the American colonies. These white men made money off of enslaving black people. Understand that. And they didn't just make a little bit of money. Notice the wording, right? They became one of the wealthiest classes in America. Okay, here we go. The next book I'm going to read from, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. For my newbies, I want you to know that this child, this slave girl, had a pedophile owner who was married. Okay? He tried to groom this kid since she was 12. Now she's older now. She tried to marry a free black man. Her owner, the pedophile, Dr. Flint, would not let her marry a free black man. So she got with a white dude, got pregnant because she thought then Dr. Flint, her owner, would at least sell her to her white paramour. Well, Dr. Flint, by the way, he was about 45 and she was 12. Anyway, Dr. Flint refused to sell her, even to the white guy. Okay? So now Linda Brent has a couple kids, and Dr. Flint is livid. He is angry. He is mad. And I'm going to pick up where he slapped her around after she just had her second child. Here we go. Just then, my grandmother came in, and he hurried out of the house. I suffered in consequence of this treatment, but I begged my friends to let me die rather than send for the doctor. There was nothing I dreaded so much as the presence of life, of his presence. My life was spared, and I was glad for the sake of my little ones. Had it not been for these ties to life, I should have been glad to be released by death, though I had lived only 19 years. Always it gave me a pang that my children had no lawful claim to a name. Their father offered his, but if I had wished to accept the offer, I dared not whilst my master lived. Moreover, I knew it would not be accepted at their baptism. A Christian name they were at least entitled to, and we resolved to call my boy for our dear, good Benjamin, who had gone far, far away from us. That was our uncle, and he had escaped slavery. My grandmother belonged to the church, so notice now. Okay, the Africans turned into the Negroes in the Americas have adopted Christianity, the religion of their white enslavers. My grandmother belonged to the church, and she was very desirous of having the children christened. I knew Dr. Flint would forbid it, and I did not venture to attempt it, but chance favored me. He was called to visit a patient out of town and was obliged to be absent during Sunday. Quote, "Now is the time," end of quote, said my grandmother. Quote, "We will take the children to church and have them christened," end of quote. When I entered the church, recollections of my mother came over me. I felt so subdued in spirit. There had she presented me for baptism without any reason to feel ashamed. She had been married. Now, this is her mother, her enslaved mother. She had been married, and had such legal rights as slavery allows to a slave. The vows had at least been sacred to her, and she had never violated them. I was glad she was not alive to know under what different circumstances her grandchildren were presented for baptism. Why had my lot been so different from my mother's? Her master had died when she was a child, and she remained with her mistress till she married. She was never in the power of any master, and thus she escaped one class of the evils that generally fall upon slaves. I need to speak to this right now. Her mother was able to keep her virginity before she got married. Linda Brent, the slave girl, was not. She's not married. And I want all of you, especially you sisters, to understand how much virginity meant even to the enslaved girls. They wanted to be morally pure for their husbands. Understand that. All right, I'm continuing. When my baby was about to be christened, the former mistress of my father stepped up to me and proposed to give it her Christian name. To this I added the surname of my father, who had himself no legal right to it, for my grandfather on the paternal side was a white gentleman. What tangled skeins are the genealogies of slavery? I love my father, but it mortified me to be obliged to bestow his name on my children. When we left the church, my father's old mistress invited me to go to her home. She clasped a gold chain around my baby's neck. I thanked her for this kindness, but I did not like the emblem. I wanted no chain to be fastened to my daughter, not even if its links were of gold. How earnestly I prayed that she might never feel the weight of slavery's chain, whose iron entereth into my soul. All right, I'm going to stop right there for Linda Brent. And the next book that I'm going to read is Ida B. Wells. If you don't know Ida B. Wells, look her up. This is a tremendously courageous sister who has made history that you must know about. All right, now, Ida was born just after slavery was legally abolished. And I want you to notice how the Black community converged together to help one another. Now, I've already mentioned, but I'll mention it again. This girl worked for a newspaper, the Free Press. She came back home after being on a trip to get new subscribers to her newspaper, and she found out that her dearest friends, I'm going to mention their names again, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Henry Stewart, had been lynched. Lynched! All right, y'all know what lynching is. So I'm going to pick up where I left off last week. This is what happened. About 10 o'clock, no. I need to tell you one more thing. The white men who were jealous of this Black store, this is by the grocery store. A white guy had a monopoly on this grocery store that was in this Black area. Well, the three men that I mentioned earlier, their names, they put together another grocery store, a Black grocery store. Okay, because they were all Black. White dude get jealous. Get jealous. Call his racist pig, dog, rotten friends. And they decide they're going to kill these Black men. You dig? Boom. But let me show you what these brothers did. What these Black brothers, let me give y'all their names again. Calvin McDowell, Henry Stewart, Thomas Moss. Let me tell you what they did. They got guns and raided in their store. They got guns! They were not going to let these white demonic bastards just kill them. Here we go. About 10 o'clock that night, when Thomas was posting his books for the week, and Calvin McDowell and his clerk were waiting on customers preparing for closing, shots rang out in the back room of the store. The men stationed there had seen several white men stealing through the rear door and fired on them without a moment's pause. 3 of these men were wounded, and others fled and gave the alarm. These brothers shot back in self-defense. Hello. Sunday morning's paper, listen to this very carefully. Sunday morning's paper came out with lurid headlines telling how officers of the law had been wounded while in the discharge of their duties, hunting up criminals. Now, these are 3 black businessmen, but the newspaper says they're criminals. Listen to this, my people. They were doing their duties hunting up criminals whom they had been told were harbored in the People's Grocery Company. That's what the store was called. The People's Grocery Company. This being, quote, a low dive in which drinking and gambling were carried on, a resort of thieves and thugs. Do you hear this description? Do you hear this description of a black grocery store? This is what was printed in the newspapers. Sound familiar? It should. They were going to paint, the media was going to paint these 3 black businessmen as thugs, as criminals, as black men that deserve to be in jail or killed. That was in the media. Okay, here we go. Let me stop preaching because I want to read. So ran the description in the leading white journals of Memphis of this successful effort of decent black men to carry on a legitimate business. The same newspaper told of the arrest and jailing of the proprietor of the store and many of the colored people. They predicted that it would go hard with the ringleaders of these, quote, or if these officers, quote, end of quote, should die. The tale of how the peaceful homes of that suburb were raided on that quiet Sunday morning by police pretending to be looking for others who were implicated in what the papers had called a conspiracy has been often told. Over 100 colored men were dragged from their homes and put in jail on suspicion. All day long on that fateful Sunday, white men were permitted in the jail to look over the imprisoned black men. Frenzied descriptions and hearsays were detailed in the newspapers, which fed the fires of sensationalism. Groups of white men gathered on the street corners and meeting places to discuss the awful crime of Negroes shooting white men. There had been no lynching in Memphis since the Civil War. But the colored people felt that anything might happen during the excitement. Many of them were in business there. Several times they had elected a member of their race to represent them in the legislature in Nashville. And a Negro, Limas Wallace, had been elected several times as a member of the city council. And we had had representation on the school board several times. Mr. Fred Savage was then our representative on the Board of Education. You see how these black people have elected themselves into office? This is during Reconstruction. Read W.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction. The manhood. Now listen to Ida. Listen to how she describes this. The manhood which these Negroes represented went to the county jail and kept watch Sunday night. Okay. The manhood. The manhood. When have you heard that kind of a term? These were brothers that fought back. These were brothers not looking for a problem. Let me really explain this. They weren't looking for a problem. But if a problem came, they were going to defend themselves. You dig that? All right, here we go. Here we go. Next book. Assata. 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 Here we go. Now, Assata is a little girl right now in the chapter that I'm reading, and she gives us a taste of American culture, just like Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl showed you how the blacks, they were really Negroes, became Christianized. Ida B. Wells talks about how the blacks stuck together after the Civil War. Okay? They voted themselves into office. They opened up businesses. Well, now we are looking at, let me find it again, Assata, who's a little girl during the late 50s and early 60s. Here we go. It was Evelyn, that's her aunt, who took me to see my first show at the Apollo. We saw Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. I was walking on clouds. After that, as soon as I learned to ride the subway by myself, I went to the daytime shows. If my mother and my aunt had known, they would have had a fit. I guess people wondered what this little girl was doing in the Apollo all by herself. But nobody ever bothered me. I was always pretty lucky that way. Barbara was a little girl who lived next door to us in Queens. She was my main friend and foe for quite a while. One day I saw her leaving her house, wearing a white dress and a little white veil like a bride wears. Everything she had on was white, all the way down to her shoes. She even had a little white Bible in her hands. I thought she was going to be in a Tom Thumb wedding like they have down south. So I went up to her and I asked her who she was marrying. She said she was making her first communion, that she was a Catholic. Well, I became an instant convert. I wanted to wear a white dress and dress up like a bride too. And Catholics even got out early from school on Wednesdays. I raced home to tell my mother. My mother was very permissive when it came to religion. She gave us carte blanche to be Catholics, Baptists, Methodists, or whatever. So I started going to Mass and to catechism classes on Wednesday. The Catholic Church was like no other church I had never been to. Down south, I always went to church, but those services were rich with music and emotion. I would sit up and be caught up in the music and watch those people who had, quote, got happy, end of quote, or, quote, got the spirit, end of quote, jumping around all over the place. I was never holy, but I had liked going to church. In the black in the black churches that I had been in, the air was charged. The music rocked and the preacher preached and sang at the same time. People felt free to do what they needed to do. It felt like if they felt like dancing, they danced. If they felt like praying, they prayed. If they felt like screaming, they screamed. And if they felt like crying, they cried. The church was there to give them strength and to get them through the long week ahead of them. Where we lived in Queens, there was no black church. The Catholic Church was different. It was silent and cold. The music was terrible, and you couldn't understand 9/10 of the service. But what fascinated me was the spookiness of it. They had so much weird stuff attached to their religion. When you walked in the door, you had to cross yourself with holy water. Then, before you could sit down, you had to genuflect. And throughout the Mass, you were forever up, down, sitting, standing, and kneeling. And there was so much stuff to learn. The Stations of the Cross, rosary beads, lighting candles, going to confession. It was all so spooky. I just knew that this had to be the real God. I felt like that too. The nuns really tripped me out. They walked around with rings on their fingers saying they were married to God. That was really weird. And they could never have children or, quote, do it, end of quote. And people said they had bald heads under their habits. I was simply overwhelmed. All right. That is Assata. Now, my beloved brothers and sisters, I want to show you my thumbnail. There's my thumbnail. And if you see these black people, okay, kind of in the middle, where it says Kansas City Panthers, yo, they are my brothers and sisters. They were Kansas City Panthers. And Captain Pete O'Neill, he's to the right of his beautiful wife, Charlotte. Love them. They organized one of the greatest escapes in 1972 because the police were going to lock up Captain Pete. Why? Because he was a strong black activist brother. He had committed no crime. You dig? But what this system wants to do, and I've read this to you before in these books, if you have black masculinity on the move, if you have intelligent black masculinity, the police, this system will do everything they can to incarcerate them. Matula Shakur stayed in jail for what, over 30 years. Okay? That's just one example. Mumia Abu Jamal is still behind bars. Do what you can. Go to the Jericho movement. We must free Mumia. But that's another story. Let me say what these came. He's my Panther brother too. But check this out. Charlotte and Pete put together one of the greatest escapes ever. They are living as we speak, or as I speak, in Tanzania. They are still in exile. Brothers and sisters, one of the reasons I always tell you, don't just look at my videos. I want your children to look at my videos. I want your grandchildren to look at my videos. I want them to know that they have heroes that they know nothing about. Pete and Charlotte gave up their lives to go into exile so that they could live because this country was going to destroy them. And they are still in exile. I'm going to talk more about them on Thursday. Now, let me even show you this. This is Charlotte's book. Charlotte O'Neill is a poet, and she's also an African priestess. Hello. Hello. That's how she spent her time in exile in Tanzania. She is a priestess. I'll talk more about that on Thursday. But I do want to read one of her poems. I'm going to read a part of it. But let me tell you even what her husband Pete wrote about her poetry. And I'm just going to give you one line because I'm running out of time here. He wrote, quote, "What was does not have to be." Black people, I want you to remember that. What was does not have to be. You have a power that this country has attempted to take away. And you personally, and I know this from my own personal experience, often you feel powerless. But I want you to look at what is going across the banner on the bottom. Remember who sent you here and consider how you got here. Then consider, why am I here on earth? Okay? Know your power. I want you to find it. Anyway, I'm going to read a little poem. I'm not going to read it all. It's long. But Charlotte O'Neill, the African priestess, she wrote a poem and it's entitled Igungun. That's an African term. Igungun is a spirit of all of our ancestors. I love Igungun. And when the the humans put on the Agungun costume. They be bringing the ancestors back to earth. So this is called Egungun, and definitely you will meet Egungun when you leave this physical body. So what Charlotte is doing here, what I'm about to read, her father has just died, and she knows that he is going to the ancestors. So here she goes. Egungun tribe and crew. They were waiting at the Blue River, waiting to welcome Dad back home. Ari goon goon, Ari goon goon. Hi, I see them. 3,000 strong. They were waiting at that blue river with foaming crests of gold and white. I could see them shouting and guiding Dad with beautiful, strong voices, urging him to come into that shimmering light that surrounded them and enveloped him, and the joy that I witnessed was palpable to my ears and soothing to my sight. There was Dad's mother, Mama Esther, honeysucker, dressed in her finest Pentecostal white robe, who Dad hadn't seen for more than 9 decades, since he was a child of just 9 years old. And there was Grandfather Lee Hill, who survived and outlived all his 3 wives. He was dressed to the nines in his silk shirt and gold spun suspenders and his Panama straw fedora crown of white. And there were Dad's sisters and brothers, 8 among the 3,000, singing, "Those gates are open, our son, our brother. We got your back like none other." I'm going to stop right there. Let me show you again. This is Charlotte today, okay? My Panther sister from Kansas City. This is Julia Wright, my other Panther sister, the eldest daughter of Richard Wright. She has a book of poems on the Gaza genocide that we are witnessing right now. And I want to show you again before I sign off. That is young Charlotte. That is young Captain Pete. Okay? Excellent Panthers in Kansas City. You dig that? But they knew that they were going to be, especially Pete, in prison. So they put together one of the greatest escapes of all time. And they are alive and well in Tanzania as I speak. Now, Charlotte can leave Tanzania. Pete cannot. So I've had the pleasure of being in this beautiful woman's company on several occasions. Brothers and sisters, salute these heroes. Know these heroes. Find out about these heroes so that you could be helpful to them in any way that you can. And I'm going to say this one more time before I check out. Do not just look at my videos like this is entertainment. I am not here to entertain you. I am here to educate you, your children and grandchildren. I want to help to create a race of Black thinkers and doers. Is that clear? Understand that. Don't allow your children to look at too much media. I'm very serious when I say this. Because media lies. They were lying back in Ida B. Wells' time. They turned those brothers into criminals, and those brothers were businessmen. Now, that was the late 1800s, around 1880 or 1890. Boom. What are they doing today? What did they say about Trayvon Martin? What did they say about Mike Brown? What did they try to say about Sandra Bland? They just killed her. People, this is not a country that has ever loved you. Don't lie to your children. Don't lie to your grandchildren. Just teach them their history and become a master of some kind of skill or trade that you can use to build the Black nation that those of us in the 60s were working toward and fighting for. All right. I'm getting ready to check out. Oops. Thought I had a comment. Oh, here it is. Let me show. That's my side. Yes, and they are still lying. Yes, yes. That's what I want y'all to see. Okay? These books that I am reading to you are not fiction, although fiction is good. Fiction, and let me wait. Let me try to find where is that. Here it is again. Now, fiction is good because if you look to the right hand corner, that's my novel. This is my first novel, and I'm showing off my novel. I wrote about a situation in 1987. It is fiction, all right, but it certainly is based on fact. So when I say I'm not reading fiction, I'm actually not, but there is good fiction. But my point is this: we have got to learn our own history and spread it to our friends, our family, neighbors, even our enemies that are Black. We have to teach ourselves what is real, what has been, because you're not going to get this anyplace else. Okay? And so each one teach one, I have stepped into that mantra. I'm not playing. I want y'all to know everything that I know and do with it whatever you think that you should. All right, brothers and sisters, I'm going to sign off now. But look, I'm going to look to see you on Thursday so that we can continue the readings and continue the conversation. I love you dearly. See you Thursday.